Okay, so good evening, everybody, and we're carrying on Bezat Hashem with the path of the just, finding our path, and we're in chapter 19, which is talking about the elements of Chassidus, of what he translates here as piety, and we really identified in previous weeks now, we were talking about the love of Hashem. First of all, we spoke about Yiras Hashem, fear of Hashem, which of course is not the lower kind of fear of getting punished. It's the AWE of Hashem. That's the level of that a chassid, a person on a higher level, tries to aspire to. And after that comes what's called love of Hashem, Avas Hashem. And Avas Hashem, he divided into three categories. Simcha, which means joy. Devekus, which means attachment. And the third quality is one called zealousness. Kina. Kina comes last. Kina, zealotry, zealousness, which of course we're going to have to explain that because these are words which are not very PC nowadays. The idea of a zealot is somebody who comes to our mind as being definitely, it's not a good thing. But we're going to see that zealotry is an essential part of love of Hashem. But of course that zealotry, and this is why it comes third in this list, can never have any kind of personal grudge-taking. It can never come from a bad midah. It can never come from anger. It has to come from a love of Hashem where a person feels outraged that Hashem's name in any way should be dragged through the mud, God forbid. And of course this obtains very much when people who should know better and should be acting better behave in a way which brings disrepute upon Klal Yisrael, the Jewish people, and by definition, therefore, by extension, to God, to Hashem, then it's something that a person should get very upset about. Why? Because he loves Hashem. The natural outcome, the natural outgrowth when you love somebody deeply is to want to defend their honor. It's to want to, and it pains you tremendously when things are said which are negative, or when somebody does something which is negative. And that's the first step we're going to see. I'll read it inside in a second. And the second step, of course, is to take active action to stop that. Now, we're not talking about violence, although one of the sources for the idea of zealotry is the story of Pinchas in the Bible. And if you remember Pinchas, the story where there was an act of gross immorality being carried out in front of the people, and Moshe and the elders were not doing anything, and of course it has to be understood why they weren't doing anything. It wasn't quite as simple as that, but Pinchas picked up his spear and impaled them with his spear in an act of zealotry, which Hashem praised as being and gave him a brisi shalom, a covenant of peace. So sometimes violence can lead to peace, to shalom. Now shalom doesn't necessarily mean peace in the way that it's translated in English. Shalom means completion. It can mean, so it's true that sometimes, of course, in very, very circumstances, very few of us will ever be in any circumstance where that kind of behavior will be required. But I guess theoretically it's possible. But many of us will be in situations where things are being said, where a person should speak up and say, that's not true. That's a lie, and you're defaming God, you're defaming the Jewish people. And he should do that even if the risk of everybody turning around and shouting at him and telling him to shut up and who are you, and you're a religious fanatic and you're a fundamentalist. A person should not be embarrassed in the situation where Hashem's name is being besmirched, being dragged through the mud in any way, God forbid, and speak up. And when he sees people doing things which are wrong, he also has to speak up. And if he doesn't speak up, he's going to be considered, as the Mesilas is going to say, as though he took part in it. Of course, the classic story of this is where the story of Bar Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, which was one of the causes for the destruction of the temple. One of the things that we fast for on Tisha B'Av is one of the Gemaras that we read, we learn. One of the few Gemaras we can learn because we're not allowed to learn Torah on Tisha B'Av, but we can learn that story. And that story, if you remember, what happened was that there was a certain person who wanted to invite Kamsa, who was his friend, and his servant went and he invited Bar Kamsa, who was his enemy. And Bar Kamsa thought he was making peace, and he came to the party, and the host told him to get out, and he embarrassed him tremendously. He said, just let me stay here, I'll pay for my meal. He said, no, get out. He said, look, I'll pay for half the feast. No, get out. He said, I'll pay for the whole thing. No, get out. And he kicked him out. And what was so terrible about this, that the Chachamim, the sages of the generation, were at that party, and they didn't say anything. And that was one of the reasons why the temple was destroyed, because in a sense, when they saw this, their failure to point out that this was a terrible injustice and to embarrass somebody in this way, it's a chil Hashem, and they failed to protest it. So that's considered to be they were complicit. They were part of the whole story. So. Let's start in now. So, the third branch of love of Hashem, as we said before, the first two are simcha, joy in serving Hashem, and devekus, cleaving to Hashem. The third branch is what we've called kina. Kina, which means zealousness. Person should be zealous when it comes to the name of Hashem. Sona es mesanov, he should hate the ones who hate Hashem, umishtadel lachniam b'ma sheyuchal, and to bring them down, to take the wind out of their sails, to bring them down in any way that he can, humble them, kedei shitia avodosoi yisborach nasis uchavoido mizrabeh, in order that he will service in order that his service, blessed be, he will be carried out and his honor increased, to stop a desecration of Hashem's name. And Vahu Masha Omar David Alalava, is what David HaMelech said when he said in Tehillim, Haloi mesanecha Hashem esne umiskomemecha eskotot. Those who hate you, Hashem, I hate them, and I'm going to quarrel. I'm going to take up a quarrel with those who rise up against you. So there are really two parts. The first part is kind of, in a way, passive, that he should hate those who hate Hashem. When he sees somebody who hates Hashem, he should have a feeling of hatred in his heart. And not only that, but, he should, in a situation when people rise up and they try to, for example, in this country now, there's a tremendous problem with people trying to stop people learning Torah, trying to change and destroy the Torah way of life, and quite deliberately. There's no doubt about it that their attitude and their actions are to destroy Torah, to try and make the Jewish people a nation like any other nation, to take Torah away from the Jewish people, to just be, we don't want to have anything more to do with Torah. We just want to be in this country and live happy secular lives. And they deliberately want to try and undermine. So a person should have tremendous hatred for that. Of course, we're not talking about doing things which are violent. I'm not talking about violence in this way. But a person should have a hatred for that, and he should do whatever he can to undermine those plans, of course, in ways which are always coming from love of Hashem, and not for the desire for violence or any other bad midah. So this is very much something which we see in our generation, and this hatred be tachlis seinosas nesim, that I will, with the utmost hatred, says David HaMelech, I hate them, and they become enemies to me. Eliyahu Novi, Eliyahu the prophet says, Kanoi Kanesi Lashem Elokei Tzavokos. That the story about Eliyahu, he said in Malachim, the story in Malachim over there, with that Eliyahu took the false prophets of Baal who were leading the nation, and he executed them for this reason. And it says, I've acted with great zeal for Hashem, the master of legions, because these people had the children. So the pasuk goes on, because the Bnei Yisrael have left your covenant as a result of these false priests. We've seen that he merited as a reward for the zeal in the honor of Hashem. Kamama ba'kosov, and also as we saw, and I mentioned this before in Bamidbar, Tachas Hashem kinei lelokov v'yechaper al b'nei Yisrael, that behold, Hashem says, I'm giving to Pinchas my covenant of peace, and it should be for him and his offspring after him a covenant of eternal priesthood, because he took vengeance for his God and he made an atonement for Klal Yisrael. So, on the opposite side of this, an apathy for wrongdoing, an apathy for somebody who, he has an interesting note here that, as we said by Pinchas, just as Hashem's zealousness, so to speak, is without any trace of anger, so that was of Pinchas. Pinchas was accused that because he came from a certain background that he was acting out of a natural anger and natural zealotry, and not something which was coming from his zealotry to defend the honor of Hashem, and that's why Hashem Davka bestowed upon him the covenant of peace, and he became a Kohen, that his family became Kohanim. Anyway, so the Chazal, on the other hand, as we said, that's of course the positive side. Now the negative side is that Chazal, our rabbis, criticize with tremendously, in a strong way, those who have the ability to protest and don't do so. They are the Gazu Dino Letofes Ba'avon Hachotim Atzmo, as we said before. They then are considered to be in the same category as the people who are actually doing the wrongdoing themselves. There's a Gemara that speaks about to the extent that a person is responsible to protest, and really is commensurate with a person's status. Somebody who sees something going on in his home that it's not according to the Torah, and he doesn't protest. I mean, protest doesn't mean getting a placard. He means tells people that you're not allowed to do that. That's wrong. So he's considered to be, and he doesn't do it. He's considered to be that he actually committed that act. He was part of that act because he has the ability to protest. Somebody, let's say, who's more influential, who's, let's say, able to protest about something that's going on in the town. If somebody opens a non-kosher restaurant, something like that, and he keeps shtum, he doesn't say anything, so it's considered as though he took part in the action of opening that kosher restaurant, and so on and so on. Somebody who was on the national level and he's able to protest and he doesn't protest, so he'll be responsible on that level. And somebody else on the international level who is in a position where he can see something which is a chil Hashem, which is something which is against the Hashem's will, which is against the Torah, and he has the ability to speak out, and he doesn't speak out, then he's considered to be as though he's one of the perpetrators. Again, everything, that's the Gemara says, everything is according to the level of the influence that a person has. And it says, he has a mashal here. In Eicha Rabbah it says that her leaders were like hearts, H-R-T-S, like, how do you say, deers. And what's the mashal? And it says that just as hearts, as deer turn their heads and bury them one amongst the others, when it gets very hot, they kind of flock together and they all put their heads together, so to speak, to escape the heat. Kach hayu gedoli Yisrael. Thus were the leaders of the Jewish people. Roim davar aveira. They saw something which is an aveira. V'hovchin pneihem mimenu, and they turned their faces away from it. That's the mashal of the deer. So Allah Kodesh Baruch Hu said back to them, Tava Shah, the time will come, V'ani e'esa lehem kain, and I will do the same to you. In other words, I'll turn my head away and ignore you. Okay. So we're now going to explain, and of course this is why he puts zealotry in the category of love of Hashem. V'zeh pashut. This is something which is obvious. Ki mi sha'oiv es chaveiro, somebody who loves his friend. Yev shala lisboil shirei makim es chaveiro o machafrim mechorfim. Also, it's impossible. A person won't stand by and see one of his friends being hit or insulted. He's going to rush out, of course, and come to his aid. So gam mi she'oev shmo lisbor, somebody who loves Hashem's name, blessed be He. Lo yuchol lisboil, he will not be able to tolerate lerois and to see she'echalu oiso chas v'shalom, that Hashem's name is being desecrated, v'she'avru al mitzvosov, or they're transgressing His commandments. V'hu ma she'amar Shlomo, that's what Shlomo HaMelech said when he said in Mishlei, Ozvei Sora Yahalu Rosha, those who forsake the Torah praise the wicked. One is necessary, they go hand in hand. For Shomrei Torah Yizgoru Bom, but the guardians of the Torah contend with them. Ki Osam Shemachalim Rosha Baroshosa V'lo Yochiach Lo Al Kapov. For those who praise a wicked person in his wickedness, rather than admonishing to his face for his spiritual blemish, Hineihem Ozvei HaTorah, they are leaving the Torah. Umanichem Oiso, they are leaving. Excuse me. They are leaving the Torah in a sense, and abandon it to be desecrated. Chas v'Chalila, God forbid. Ach sha'omer omrea mischazkim laharzika, but the guardians of the Torah who strengthen themselves to support and reinforce it, vadei she'yizgorobam, they will certainly take them on. They will confront them. Lo yuchol lisapek ulis charish, they will not be able to contain themselves and just be and remain silent. He brings an interesting diuk here, an inference, which is there are two things here. One from who refrains from praising evildoers, and also from contending with them, does not forsake the Torah, but he's not guarding it. A true chassid, however, somebody who is unable to tolerate wrongdoing and will rise up and actively, proactively go out to guard Hashem's honor. Here's another interesting idea here, that sometimes you find, and it's a bit of a problem, that you'll find people, let's say certain politicians, I'm not going to go into names, in Israel who are defending the Jewish people and to some accounts maybe doing a good job. And you often hear people praising them and saying what a good job they're doing and what a tough life they have, etc., etc. But these people very often are not keeping Shabbos, and they're not keeping the Torah. So it has to be said, whenever you say, okay, maybe they're doing a good job in this respect, but you can't praise them. This is exactly what he's talking about, without pointing out their faults. And of course, if you're in a position to actually confront them in that way. For sure, the leaders of the Jewish people have to be people who are keeping the Torah. Otherwise, that's a tremendous chilul Hashem. So, we are... let's just finish off here. So now, so the two levels, as we said before, that Shlomo HaMelech said that those who forsake the Torah praise the wicked, but the guardians of the Torah contend with them. For those who praise the wicked person in his wickedness rather than admonishing to his face for his spiritual blemish, in spite of the fact that he might be doing good things. You can't just say he's a good guy and ignore the fact that he's not keeping the Torah, he's Mechal Shabbos, he's doing all kinds of other things. They are forsaking the Torah and abandon it to be desecrated. Chas v'Chalila, God forbid. And we said before, the guardians of the Torah, and that's the second part of the Pasuk in Mishlei. V'shomrei Torah yizgoru bo, they will actively take up the attack to confront and criticize and do whatever they can to right that wrong. V'amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu el Iyov. Hashem spoke, himself told Iyov the importance of being machnia, the Rishoyim, to humbling the wicked and subduing them. Chofetz arvois, apech ure'ei kol ge'ah v'hashpileu. It says, spew forth the furies of your anger, see every haughty one and lower him. Whereas kol ge'ah hachni'eu v'hadoich rishoim tachtom. See every haughty one and humble him, crush the wicked in their places. Tom name ba'ofor, hide them all together in the dirt. Yachad bneihem, chafvosh ba'tomun, confine their faces to a hidden place. Kizeu tokech avo shiyuchal la'aros mi sha'oiv. Because this is a true indication, and in effect, the deepest indication how much you love someone, in this case, of course, Hashem, is that you can't abide, you can't stand it when somebody should attack them physically, emotionally, in any way. A person who really loves somebody, and that's why this is part of Avas Hashem, will rise and do whatever he can to confront, to confound, and to prevent, and to stop Chil Hashem and people doing things which are against the Torah. Okay, we're going to pause here for this week. Next week, Bezrat Hashem, we're going to go on to the last part of Chassidus. We've been talking up till now in this whole section of Chassidus was the, so to speak, the action of Chassidus, the method of doing Chassidus, and now we're talking about the kavanah, the intent behind an act which is considered to be on the level of, how do we say, piety, the higher level, Chassidus. And we paraphrase this by saying that the action is the what, the method, how you do that action in the way that it's supposed to be, in order that it will be considered to be on the level of Chassidus, that's the how. And next week we're going to be talking about, Hashem, the intent, the why. So we have the what, the how, and the why. Okay.